I am writing these lines while my hands are still trembling, and I must type very fast before the laptop battery runs out. The power in the house has been cut, or at least that's what I think. I dare not leave the bedroom to go down and check the circuit breaker. It all started with the clock. It was a Seth Thomas grandfather clock from 1924, casing made of dark oak, standing over 2 meters tall. It has stood towering in the corner of the ground floor hallway of this house since before I was born. In my childhood memories, its ticking was the most soothing sound in the world. But 3 years ago, at exactly 3:17 a.m. on November 12th, the moment my grandfather's heart stopped at Street Jude Hospital, the clock also fell silent. No one touched it. No one wound it. The best watchmakers in the region all shook their heads, saying the internal mechanism was welded shut by rust, even though the outside still looked shiny. It became a silent monument, the hour and minute hands forever frozen at 3:17. I moved here 2 weeks ago. The house is of old Victorian architecture, located in isolation at the edge of town, where phone signal is intermittent. For a freelance graphic designer like me, this silence is paradise, or at least I thought so until last night. It was Tuesday night. I stayed up late to finish a book cover project deadline. It was about 1:45 a.m. The space was completely silent, the kind of heavy silence you only feel in old houses, where floorboards occasionally groan due to temperature changes. I was reaching for a glass of water when I heard it. Clack. Screech. The sound was very faint, like old metal rubbing against each other after years of sleeping. I stopped breathing, listening. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds. Tick. A dry, sharp sound rang out from the hallway, tearing through the quiet night. It was louder than any clock sound I ever remembered. Tock. I pushed the chair back and stood up, goosebumps rising along my spine. Impossible. I knew for sure I had never touched the winding key, and it was stored safely in grandfather's desk drawer in the attic. I stepped out of the office, the light from the computer screen casting behind my back, creating long shadows on the wooden floor. The hallway was pitch black, with only faint moonlight filtering through the stained glass window above the main door. The clock stood there at the end of the hallway. Tick. Tock. The heavy brass pendulum, which had been motionless for the past 1,095 days, was swinging, a slow, steady rhythm. But there was something very wrong. It created a bone-chilling cold draft every time it swept back and forth, something I could feel even standing 3 meters away. I swallowed, my dry throat tasting the metallic tang of invisible fear. I moved closer, turning on the flashlight on my phone to shine on the clock face. The dusty, blurry glass reflected my pale face. I squinted at the Roman numerals. The minute hand did not inch towards number 4 IV. It jerked back towards number 33. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. But no. Tick. The second hand jerked back 1 notch. Tock. It retreated another notch. The clock didn't just come back to life. It was counting down. And the most terrible thing wasn't that it was running backwards. But when I looked at the hour and minute hands, it was no longer pointing at 3:17. It was pointing at 3:15. It had been running for 2 minutes. And in that moment, I smelled a scent rushing straight into my nose, the smell of cherry Cavendish pipe tobacco. The tobacco my grandfather smoked every day, but he had successfully quit 10 years before he passed away. The smoke was thick, fresh, as if someone had just exhaled right next to me. My first reflex was not to run away, but to try to stop it. That is the stupid logic of humans when facing fear. If I could turn this machine off, everything would return to normal. If I stop the pendulum, that ghostly tobacco smell will disappear. I grabbed the tiny brass handle on the side of the clock case. It was freezing cold, cold enough to make my fingertips sting like touching dry ice. I yanked hard. The glass door didn't budge. Damn it, I cursed silently, my breath starting to turn into a thin white mist in front of me. I remembered clearly that grandfather always kept the winding key in the top drawer of the commode chest right next to it. I rushed over, rummaged in the dark, and found the old brass key, my hands trembling violently. I inserted the key into the small keyhole on the glass face. It fit perfectly, but it wouldn't turn. I used both hands, twisting so hard that the metal ground against each other, screeching. The lock felt as if it had been welded shut from the inside. Tick. Tock. The sound now sounded heavier, like a hammer hitting concrete rather than metal colliding. Every tock beat, When the pendulum swung to the left, the flashlight on my phone flickered once. I backed away, panting. The temperature in the hallway was dropping unreasonably. Not the cold of a draft through a door crack, but a deadly, stagnant cold, as if the air in the room was being sucked out. I glanced at the thermostat mounted on the opposite wall. The electronic screen flickered madly before dying, but the last number I managed to see was 12 degrees Celsius. Only 2 minutes ago, it was 24 degrees Celsius. I rubbed my goosebump-covered arms, eyes glued to the clock face. The minute hand jerked back past number 2. It is now 3:10. Suddenly, I realized something even more wrong than the cold. The dust layer. When I moved here 2 weeks ago, the house was covered in a thick layer of dust on the molding, and the staircase handrail that I hadn't had time to clean yet. But right now, under the patchy flashlight beam, the mahogany handrail was shiny, as if just varnished. The yellowed paint on the walls looked fresher, no longer having the peeling spots I planned to patch this weekend. The house wasn't just getting colder, it was getting younger. And along with that change, another sound began to creep into my ears, intermingled with the ticking. A crackling sound, like lost radio signal, then clarifying into a cough. 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 A dry, raspy cough coming from the pitch-black living room to my left. It was the cough of an old man with chronic bronchitis. It was the cough of my grandfather in his final days. But he died at the hospital, 10 miles away, not in this living room. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking with fear. "Is anyone there?" Answering me was only the talk. Tick. Becoming increasingly rapid and heavy, dragging footsteps began to sound on the living room wooden floor, moving gradually towards the doorway where I was standing. I stepped back, my heel hitting the edge of the console table at the entrance, almost falling backward. The dragging footsteps stopped right at the living room threshold, where my flashlight beam intersected with the dense darkness. No one was there, but the air in that spot was disturbed. I saw dust particles suspended in the light beam swirling violently as if an invisible object had just passed through, and the scent changed again. The sweet smell of tobacco vanished, replaced by the smell of iodine and old gauze, the nauseatingly characteristic smell of a hospital that I had smelled of my grandfather during the last 6 months he fought lung cancer. "This isn't real," I muttered, my hand groping behind my back for the kitchen doorknob. The freezing sensation from the metal pierced through my sweat-soaked palm. I rushed into the kitchen, slammed the door, and bolted it. I knew a flimsy wooden door latch meant nothing to an entity that could walk through walls, or reverse time, but it was instinct. I grabbed the meat cleaver from the rack, back pressed tight against the sink, gasping like a stranded fish. It was quieter in the kitchen. The tick, tock, from outside still echoed in, but now its tempo was faster. It was no longer a slow tick, tock, but urgent, hurried. Ticktock. I looked around the kitchen to find a sense of reality, but what I saw made my stomach knot. Last week, right when I moved in, the first thing I did was repaint this kitchen. I hated its old chicken fat yellow color, so I covered it with 2 coats of modern gray paint from Dulux. I remember clearly because I still keep the receipt in my wallet, but before my eyes, the wall was boiling. The gray paint layer was bubbling, peeling off and dissolving into nothingness like seafoam on sand. Patches of gray disappeared, revealing the yellowed floral wallpaper underneath, the thing I had spent all day scraping off. This process happened in just a few seconds. My modern kitchen had vanished, returning to the original state of my grandfather's shabby kitchen from the 2000s. I looked down at my hand. The knife I was holding was still the newly bought IKEA knife. The phone in my hand was still an iPhone 14. It seemed it only affected the house, the memories of this very place. Suddenly, the landline phone rang. Ring. Ring. I jumped, almost dropping the knife. I had canceled the landline service right when I moved in. The cable wire was even lying coiled in the recycling bin at my feet, but the ancient rotary phone mounted on the wall, the thing I thought was just for decoration, was vibrating violently. I stared at it. The ring wasn't resonant, wasn't clear. It was raspy and distorted, like sound coming from underwater. Ring. I approached, my trembling hand lifting the receiver. I said nothing, just pressed it to my ear. On the other end was the boiling sound of static noise, and mingled within it, I heard my own voice, but that voice was younger, more innocent, and sobbing. "I'm sorry, Grandpa. I'm sorry for not making it in time." That was my voice 3 years ago. That was what I said over the phone to the doctor when receiving the news of his death. The clock out there wasn't just turning back time, it was rewinding the pain. And then, the sound of the clock hands in the hallway suddenly changed. A loud clang rang out like a spring being stretched too far. I glanced out the door crack. The pendulum was swinging so hard it hit the wooden sides. Bam! Bam! It was accelerating. We were free-falling into the past. I dropped the phone receiver, the coiled cord hitting the wall, creating soulless thumping sounds. I have to get out of here. Immediately. I rushed out of the kitchen, crossing the living room towards the main door. But just as I crossed the threshold, my foot tripped hard over a hard object, sending me tumbling to the floor, my knee throbbing with pain. I scrambled up and pointed the flashlight at the ground. It was a low mahogany coffee table, with legs carved in the shape of dragon claws. Cold sweat broke out all down my spine. This table. I sold it to the thrift store on the very first day I moved in, to make room for the modern IKEA glass table. I panned the flashlight around. The spacious living room was now suffocatingly cramped. My 55-inch flat-screen TV had disappeared. Instead, sitting imposingly on the cabinet was a thick, boxy Toshiba CRT TV, the convex gray screen like a blind eye staring at me. My cream leather sofa was also gone, replaced by a set of old plum-red velvet chairs. The thing I hated sitting on as a child because it was always covered in cat hair and dust. All of grandfather's furniture, all the things that had been thrown away, sold, or burned, they had returned to their exact old spots, as if they had never left. T-I-C-K, T-O-C-K, T-I-C-K, T-O-C-K. The clock sound in the hallway now sounded like the heartbeat of a giant monster sprinting. I stumbled towards the main door. I didn't care about the furniture anymore. I just needed to get out, run to the pickup truck parked in the front yard and drive far away. I grabbed the doorknob, twisted hard, and threw it open. The outside air rushed in, but it didn't carry the cold of November night mist. It carried the stifling, humid heat of summer, and the deafening sound of crickets chirping. I stood frozen on the porch steps. My front yard had changed. The stone-paved path I just hired someone to make last week had disappeared, replaced by a beaten earth path overgrown with grass. But what horrified me most was the thing standing towering in the middle of the yard, the ancient oak tree. That giant tree was split in half by lightning in 2015, crushing a corner of the shed roof. I remembered that scene clearly, remembered the loud chainsaw sound for 3 days to clear it, but now it was standing there, intact. Lush foliage obscuring the moonlight, its black shadow covering the whole yard like long arms reaching out. I looked down to my left wrist by reflex, where I tattooed a small tattoo, my mother's date of birth, in 2020. Under the trembling flashlight, my skin was smooth. The tattoo had disappeared. Not a scar, not a trace. A wave of nausea hit hard. I wasn't just seeing the past, my body was being rewound to the past. I snapped my head around to look at the driveway. My shiny black 2019 Ford Ranger pickup truck had evaporated completely. Instead, lying neglected on the overgrown grass was a blue double-frame Martin 107 bicycle, the bike I rode to school every day in middle school. The handlebars were bent to one side, a trace of the time I crashed into a fence at age 14. I touched my face. The stubble I had been growing for 3 months was gone. My facial skin was tight and smooth, but my limbs began to feel strangely achy. The growing pains in my knee joints, which tormented me throughout puberty, were returning, aching in the marrow. I intended to grab the bike and run, but when I looked up at the sky, my feet felt nailed to the ground. There were no stars, no moon, no streetlights from the distant town. The sky was a cloudy, dead gray, silent and deathly, like a TV screen with no signal, static. The world outside the perimeter of this house seemed not yet rendered, or it no longer existed. The edge of the garden ended abruptly in a dense, swirling fog. I couldn't get out. I was trapped in this house's timeline. Bang! A loud crash rang out from inside the house, like someone had just thrown a heavy object against the wall. I flinched, backed away, my back hitting the rough trunk of the oak tree. Then voices began to creep out from the slightly open window cracks. "You promised me you would throw it away." A woman's voice. high, shrill, and trembling with rage. My blood froze. I recognized that voice immediately, even though the last time I heard it was when I was 5 years old. "Grandma, don't be loud. The boy is sleeping upstairs," a deep male voice replied. "Grandpa." His voice sounded younger, much stronger than what I remembered. I tiptoed closer to the living room window, heart pounding against my chest. This is not a ghost. This is a memory. The house is replaying a tape recording of the past. "I don't care," Grandma screamed, accompanied by the sound of shattering glass. "It's counting down, Robert. Don't you see? Last night I saw that shadow standing at the foot of the stairs. It's demanding your debt." I held my breath, gripping the rotting wooden windowsill tight. "Debt? What debt?" "It's just a hallucination, Mary." Grandpa's voice tried to reassure, but was full of anxiety. "The clock is just jammed. I'll fix it tomorrow." "You can't fix it," Grandma interrupted, her voice dropping to a fearful hiss. "We have to return it, before it takes something to make up for the time you borrowed." The air around me suddenly became heavy, air pressure increasing as if a major storm was coming. From inside the house, the tick-tock sound changed tempo again. It was no longer just fast, it became manic. The second hand spun, screeching like a wood saw. Screech. 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 I looked through the window crack into the living room. Furniture was moving, chairs sliding by themselves on the floor, pictures on the walls shaking violently, and in the hallway corner, the grandfather clock was emitting a pale, ghostly purple light. The pendulum swung so hard I thought it was about to shatter the glass case. We were rushing through time markers, and I knew where this train was heading. 1995. The night my grandmother disappeared without a trace, leaving my grandfather and father in extreme panic, which the police could never explain. I have to go in. I have to find grandfather's repair journal. He always recorded everything about that damn clock. If there is a way to stop it, it lies there. I took a deep breath, pushing the door to step into the time storm. Stepping into the house now was like wading upstream against a flash flood. The air was as thick as jelly, weighing heavily on my chest. Every step was a battle. The sound of whistling wind, the sound of furniture crashing, and the sound of the clock hands spinning madly created a chaotic symphony that made my ears ring. I crawled on the floor, trying to keep a low center of gravity to avoid being knocked over by invisible tornadoes. Family portraits on the wall fell one by one, shattering to pieces. But strangely, as soon as they hit the ground, the fragments pieced themselves back together. The frames healed themselves and flew back up the wall. But they were different pictures. The color photos of the 2000s turned into yellowed black and white photos of the 92nds. I dragged myself to the foot of the clock. It was shaking violently, like a living creature having a seizure. I remembered the times grandfather maintained it. He never opened the front. He always knelt down, slipping his hand into the narrow gap between the clock base and the floor. "Please, be there," I groaned, my fingers clawing at the oak wood under the base. My fingernail tore and bled, but I didn't dare stop. I felt a small latch. Click. A secret compartment popped out from the baseboard right next to the clock. Inside was a black leather notebook, moldy and damp. I snatched it, pressing my back tightly against the wall for support, trembling hands turning page by page under the flickering flashlight of the phone. The only piece of technology left from 2024, starting to heat up as the battery was about to explode. The first pages, written in neat fountain pen ink from 1950, recorded very normally, oiling gears, adjusting pendulum, dusting. But later on, the handwriting became more scribbled, hurried. The 14th of October, 1988. It runs slow. I swear it runs slow. 1 hour on the clock face equals 3 hours outside. I finished the manuscript in one night, but outside, it was still dark. Mary said I looked old too fast. I flipped quickly through dozens of pages. The 2nd of November, 1994. I hear it whispering. It doesn't want oil, it wants something else. Yesterday, Misa, the cat, disappeared. This morning I found its fur stuck all inside the gearbox, but no blood. The cat was erased, and the last page, written hastily in pencil, the strokes indented so deep they tore the next page. The date recorded was the 11th of November, 1995, one day before my grandmother went missing. I made a mistake buying it from that merchant. He didn't sell clocks, he sold borrowed time. For 40 years, it gave me extra time to work, to make money, to live longer than others. But now the debt is due. It doesn't measure passing time. It's counting down to payment day. The rule: borrow an hour, pay a year. Borrow a life, pay a life. Mary knew. It is watching her. The writing ended abruptly with a long pencil streak, as if the writer was dragged away violently right while writing. I dropped the notebook. My throat choked with bitterness. Grandfather had borrowed time from this monster, and the price to pay was not him, but those around him. Suddenly, the tick-tock stopped. The space fell into a terrifying, absolute silence. No more wind, no more crashing. I raised my head. The clock hands were pointing exactly at 11:55 p.m. The date on the wall calendar had stopped. The red digits struck my eyes. The 12th of November, 1995. My phone flashlight died out, but the room wasn't dark. A cold blue light was beaming out from the cellar door crack under the staircase. The door my father had nailed shut for 30 years. The cellar door latch screeched, creak. The wine cellar door didn't open on hinges. It collapsed, as if the rotting wood fibers had endured past their limit, but it made no sound at all. In this sound-sucked space, the silence was more terrifying than an explosion. From the pitch-black darkness of the stairs leading down to the cellar, a figure stepped up. Not a monster, a woman. She wore a white nightgown reaching her ankles, graying hair in a loose bun at the nape of her neck. She walked decisively, but her eyes were glazed, soulless like a sleepwalker. Grandma Mary, in flesh and blood. The person who disappeared 29 years ago. She looked younger than in the memorial photos, her face not yet marked by too many wrinkles of old age. She walked past me, cold. A bone-chilling cold pierced through my body as if I were just a wisp of smoke. She didn't see me. She was walking towards the clock. I wanted to scream, wanted to rush out to stop her, but my body was completely paralyzed. I was locked tight in the corner of the wall, only my eyes could still move. She stopped in front of the grandfather clock. The hand still pointed to 11:55 p.m. Then I saw it. The shadow of the clock on the wall began to separate. It was no longer a flat, two-dimensional shadow. It swelled up, thick and viscous like tar, then slowly slithered down to the floor, towering taller than its host. It was an entity skinny to the point of absurdity, with long limbs and joints protruding sharply. It had no face, only a deep black hollow where the head should be, swirling constantly like cigarette smoke. It stood behind my grandmother, a meter taller than her. Grandma raised her hand, touching the clock glass. Her voice rang out, not a whisper, but a desperate affirmation. I pay the debt for him. Leave my family alone. The entity tilted its faceless head down. It reached out a long, black finger and touched her shoulder lightly. No blood. No scream. Right at the point of contact, her nightgown began to fade. No, not just fading. It was turning to dust. Her flesh began to crack and wither at a terrifying speed. Her hair turned white and fell out. In a split second, she aged dozens of years. She collapsed, her body shriveled up like a dried mummy. And then, the black shadow expanded, swallowing her into its darkness. She vanished. Completely. Like a pencil drawing erased cleanly from white paper, the clock vibrated with a satisfied clang. The minute hand moved up a notch. 11:56 p.m. The chill running down my spine turned into a sharp pain. I realized the entity hadn't returned into the wall. It was turning around. The black hollow on its face was aiming straight at the corner where I was huddled. It saw me. I didn't belong to this memory. I was a foreign object. Or worse. I was the interest accrued after 29 years of late payment. It took a step towards me. The wooden floor beneath its foot rotted instantly, turning into gray ash. That entity didn't walk. It floated forward. Every inch it moved closer. I felt the vitality in my body being sucked out through my pores. First came the cold, then the aching pain in the marrow. I looked down at my right arm, bracing on the floor to move back. The smooth skin of age 25 was transforming right before my eyes. Gray-brown liver spots appeared in speckles. The skin began to sag, wrinkling like a dried apple peel. The finger joints swelled up, stiff with acute arthritis. I had aged 40 years in just 3 seconds. Terror broke the paralysis. I screamed a hoarse scream, the voice of an old man, and waved my hand to grab anything within reach. My old trembling fingers touched the black iron fire poker lying next to the fireplace. The black shadow extended a long, lanky arm towards my face. I could smell it, the scent of damp earth from a freshly dug grave and wilted chrysanthemums. Get away! I used all my remaining strength, swinging the iron bar at the entity's shin. The iron bar went through it like smoke, smashing onto the floor, sending up sparks. But the blow made it pause for a beat. Its pitch-black eye socket wavered. It has no physical entity. I can't kill it, but it is bound to the clock. I scrambled up, knee joints cracking painfully. I didn't run to the door. I dashed straight towards the Seth Thomas clock. The entity seemed to realize my intention. It screeched a piercing sound, like metal grinding on glass. The darkness around it flared up, shooting out jet-black tentacles whipping at my legs. I fell face down, the fire poker flying away. A freezing tentacle wrapped tight around my left ankle, yanking me backward. I felt like being splashed with acid. I saw my jean pant leg disintegrating, and the flesh underneath starting to wither. I kicked hard with my right foot, heel hitting the black shadow, but uselessly. I was being dragged towards the wine cellar, the black mouth waiting to swallow me like it swallowed Grandma. T-I-C-K. T-O-C-K, T-I-C-K, T-O-C-K. The clock sound was deafening. It was mocking me. I writhed, fingernails clawing the wooden floor to find a grip. My hand touched the sharp edge of a broken picture frame fragment. I grabbed it, spun around, and slashed hard at the pitch-black tentacle. The sharp glass blade cut through the black smoke. No blood, but the tentacle severed and vanished. I scrambled up, rushing at the clock with the fury of someone cornered. I had no iron bar. I had no hammer. I clenched my hand into a fist. Crash! I punched straight into the clock face glass. Glass shards embedded in my hand, fresh blood spurting out, mixing with the brass gears inside. But the pendulum still swung. It didn't stop. The entity roared in fury behind me. I felt the bone-chilling cold crashing down on my head. I thrust both bloody hands inside the clock case, ignoring the spinning gears grinding my flesh. I grabbed the metal rod connecting to the pendulum. It was scorching hot. Not temperature, but energy. Stop! I screamed, and used the full weight of my old body to hang heavily onto the pendulum, trying to hold it tight, resisting the colossal inertia of time. A dry crack rang out from inside the mechanism. That crack sound wasn't wood breaking. It was the sound of something more abstract, snapping, like the backbone of time. The pendulum stopped abruptly in midair, tilted 45 degrees to the left, defying all laws of gravity. The gears inside ground tight into my bloody fingers, but I didn't let go. I felt my warm blood flowing down along the metal rod, seeping into every crevice of the central mechanism. Sizzle. The sound of blood contacting red-hot brass rang out like meat grilling on an iron grate. A pungent burnt smell rose, the smell of burning metal and old rust. Behind me, the shadow entity paused. Its bottomless gaunt mouth opened wide, emitting a shrill groan. A crackling sound, ear-piercing like thousands of cassette tapes being rewound at once. It couldn't touch me anymore. Its thick, viscous black body began to shake violently, distorted like a glitched TV signal, then pulled forcefully towards the clock by an invisible suction. It is being recalled. You want debt? I'm paying you right here. I screamed with the hoarse voice of an old man, frantically pressing my crushed hand deeper into the grinding mechanism. The clock shuddered one last time. The Roman numeral face cracked wide open in half. A shockwave exploded from the center of the clock, flinging me backwards like a rag doll. I slammed my back onto the hard floor, my head hitting the wall edge hard. Everything went dark. The last sound I heard was the mainspring snapping, whipping against the wood, W-H-I-P. Whip, and the sound of metal clattering onto the cold floor. Then silence. I didn't know how long I had passed out. When I opened my eyes, the weak, dusty morning sunlight was shining through the stained glass window above the main door. I lay still on the wooden floor, exhaling heavy breaths, waiting for the tick-tock. But nothing. Only the sound of birds chirping in the garden, and the sound of trucks rumbling on the distant highway. The sounds of the real world. I struggled to sit up. A fierce pain hit, but not from dry, old bones. I looked down at my hands. The skin was smooth again. The gray-brown liver spots had disappeared. The muscles in my arm were firm again. I had returned to age 25, but my right hand, it was mangled. Blood had dried into black patches, sticking the fingers together. The index and middle fingers were snapped, swollen purple and blue, and the palm was riddled with deep, serrated cuts caused by the gears. I turned my head to look at the end of the hallway. The Seth Thomas clock still stood there, but it was truly dead. The glass door was shattered, glass shards scattered all over the floor. The clock face was torn in half vertically. The pendulum lay neglected on the ground, severed from the shaft. And most importantly, the clock hands no longer pointed to 11:56 or 3:15. It stopped at 6. I dragged myself up, staggering towards the kitchen. I needed water. I needed to wash the wound. I needed to know if I was crazy. But when passing the large mirror in the foyer, the mirror I planned to throw away last week, I froze. The face in the mirror was still young. The eyes were still mine. But the hair, my jet black hair, had turned completely white. White as fishing line. White as the hair of an 80-year-old man. And on my neck, a red welt ran all the way around, like a noose mark, or like the strap mark of an invisible watch tightening. I survived. I paid the principal with my blood, but it seems the interest was still deducted from my lifespan. I didn't leave immediately. There was one thing I needed to confirm. A terrible thing that if I didn't witness with my own eyes, I would forever convince myself that last night was just a nightmare caused by a gas leak. I wrapped the tattered shirt around my mangled hand to staunch the bleeding, then walked towards the wine cellar door under the stairs. The rotten wooden door had been blown open, just like in the illusion I had seen. The nails my father hammered to seal it in 1995 lay scattered on the floor, rusty and bent. I turned on my phone flashlight. Battery showed red 5%, but still bright enough. I walked down the cold, damp stone steps. The smell of mold hit hard, but this time there was no smell of tobacco or hospitals, just the smell of oblivion. At the bottom of the cellar, amidst empty wine racks covered in cobwebs, there was a pile of gray ash lying neatly in the middle of the floor. It wasn't ordinary dust. It was piled up into the vague shape of a human lying curled up. I held my breath, approached, and used the tip of my shoe to lightly brush the top layer of dust. A metal object glinted under the light. I bent down, using the thumb and index finger of the uninjured hand to pick it up. It was a white gold ring, set with a small sapphire stone. The inside of the ring was engraved with tiny letters. Love you always, Robert 1955. Grandma's wedding ring. She never left. She wasn't kidnapped either. She had been here, right under my father's and my feet for 29 years. Literally turned to dust by that time monster. Grandfather knew that. He knew the price to pay, so he forbade anyone from opening the cellar door. I clenched the ring in my hand, tears streaming down. Not out of fear, but because of the cruelty of the truth. Afterwards, I called the police and the ambulance. I lied that I had an accident while trying to move the old clock. They believed immediately, looking at my mangled hand and the chaotic scene full of glass shards and wood debris. As for the pile of ashes in the cellar, I kept silent. I secretly collected them into a ceramic jar before they arrived. She deserved to rest in peace, not become evidence for a forensic investigation that would never have an answer. 6 months have passed since that night. I sold the house for a dirt cheap price, to a young couple coming from the city. I didn't warn them. I knew I was a bastard, but I consoled myself that the clock had been destroyed. The monster had been banished, or at least its source of nourishment had been cut off. That couple cleared out the pile of old furniture, including the corpse of the Seth Thomas clock, and dumped them in the scrapyard. I moved to an apartment on the 15th floor, in the middle of the noisy city center, where lights shine 24/7, and there are no dark corners for shadows to hide. But I couldn't escape. The doctor said my body is undergoing a rare premature aging syndrome, progeria, even though genetic tests found no mutation. At age 26, I have the bone density of a 60-year-old man. My hair remained white and never turned black again. My hand skin was wrinkled and dry. Every time I went to sleep, I had to remove batteries from all clocks in the house. I taped black tape over the display clocks of the microwave and induction stove. Because sometimes, when I let my guard down, I still see it. Not the monster, but time. The digital clock on my laptop sometimes jumps from 23:59 down to 23:58. The traffic light counting down from 30 seconds red suddenly jumped back to 35. And most terrifying are the dreams. In the dream, I see myself standing in front of that grandfather clock. It had been fully repaired. And on the reflective glass, I saw the image of my old self, weary, trapped inside the tight wooden box. I was tapping on the glass. I was trying to scream at my outside self, "Don't break it. You can't kill it. You'll just become a new battery for it." I write this story as a final warning. If you inherit an antique and you feel it watching you, or time around it passes strangely, don't try to fix it. Don't try to find out its history. Burn it. Or run far away. Because the time debt has compound interest. And I think I've just started my payment term. The clock hands on my computer screen just jumped back 1 minute. Here we go again. I intended to stop the story there. I really intended to close the laptop and try to sleep. But just now, my phone vibrated. A new email notification. It was from the new owner of the old house. The email subject was, "We found this in the wall. Do you want it back?" Below was an attachment. I shouldn't have opened it, but my finger automatically clicked. It was a photo of a yellowed, crumbling piece of paper, seemingly fallen into the gap between the drywall and the old brick layer where the clock used to stand. It was a page torn from Grandfather's journal, the page I had missed that night. The handwriting on the paper was not Grandfather's. That handwriting was mine. Although the ink had faded and the paper rotted, I still recognized my characteristic reverse-hooked G. The date written at the top of the page made my heart stop. The 12th of November, 2024. It is today. The content was just 2 lines. It doesn't need wood. It needs bone. It doesn't need oil. It needs blood. You broke the cocoon shell. Now you are the new shell. I dropped the phone. The apartment room suddenly went absolutely silent. The noisy traffic sound from the street vanished. I put my hand on my left chest. My heart. It wasn't pounding. I held my breath listening. The sound rang out from my chest, slow, dry, and metallic. Tick, tock, tick, tock. With each beat, I felt my ribs vibrating like wood knocking together. I rushed into the bathroom, staring wildly into the mirror. In the darkness reflected deep in my pupils, I saw a brass pendulum swinging back and forth, and on my forehead the wrinkles were moving, rearranging into a shape. I wasn't aging due to disease. I was turning into it. If you are reading this line, and you hear a ticking sound in the room, even though there is no clock, don't look behind you. It has started counting down your hours.